Hi, grade 12. So I've been busy this evening and I remember that I need to just finish going through PowerPoint 2 because my iPad was full and I didn't have enough time to check if all those, the first 3 had uploaded onto Google Classroom, and I didn't want to delete them in case they hadn't. So I just want to finish going through that last part, not very long. Okay, so we were talking about genetic bottlenecking. So now founder effect and genetic bottlenecking, there are both ways in which the population is reduced. Okay, let's just go back a bit. With genetic bottlenecking, the population is reduced because a small part of the population migrates to another area. All right, and depending on what genes are present in those smaller groups, which then go to another area and become the founding population in that new area, depending on what genetic variation they have, will determine the future trends in allele frequency, if you remember that term. So it's either the red or the blue allele. Which one becomes more common depends on what was originally present in the small population that broke away. So both of them reduce the size of the population and could result in less variation. All right, because there you've got only the red alleles, here only blue, and here still a mixture of both, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. All right, so genetic bottlenecking is also reduction in population size, but it's usually doesn't last for such a long time, and it could be due to some kind of environmental disturbance. All right, it can be the variation can be reduced by a lot, and then it can recover quite quickly, depending on the situation. So here you've got the genetic variation in the bigger population, and then the population numbers drop rapidly because of something in the environment. It could be a disease, it could be a major drought, it could be a tsunami. I'm just thinking of the little video that we watched in class, and you must please watch the one called Genetic Bottlenecking and Founder Effect, and it's using little Lego pieces. It's actually quite sweet. All right, so the surviving population, much smaller, and you can see this population doesn't have as much variation as the original one. It just depends on which genes are randomly, which genes are present in that smaller population. So both of them result in a smaller population size, but that smaller population size arises in different ways. Okay, so the penguin story, I know I've said this already. So there was lots of variation, and then over time, because of human exploitation of land and fishing, catching all the fish that is normally food for penguins, the numbers reduced rapidly, and then because of breeding programs, etc., the numbers are now increasing again, and that's conservation methods and so on. All right. So now the story, I don't think I'm going to go over this again. It was basically the northern elephant seals population numbers reduced by hunting, but now they're back to 30,000 again. But the southern elephant seals population remained high because there was no hunting. There was no bottlenecking effect. So we were talking about the cheetahs. So like I said, it's quite odd, that they say that cheetahs should have become extinct in the last ice age because they're just not very well adapted, which I don't really see. But there were 2 events which bottlenecked, or 2 genetic bottlenecks which occurred. So during the last ice age and in the 1800s, when farmers hunted the animals, trying to protect their livestock. All right, so the population size has decreased rapidly over time. So this is just showing one bottleneck event, and it should have led to the extinction of cheetahs, but now we've got lots of breeding programs and hybridization or outbreeding, bringing in cheetahs from other national parks or artificially inseminating cheetahs with sperm from cheetahs of another national park. So the amount of variation is increasing again. There's more heterozygosity, okay, introducing more alleles so that there's less of a chance of an individual having 2 recessive alleles. And then, for example, having kinked tails, that's the one I always remember, which affects their balance, and then they can't run so fast, and they can't make very quick turns as they're trying to chase their prey, like an impala. All right, so this we have done, and now there's two examples here. So the Dutch immigrants that came from Holland 300 years ago, not only did they bring Huntington's chorea, but there's a disease called familial hypercholesterolemia. So in other words, very high cholesterol. Now, normally there are proteins or enzymes in our bodies which reduce the high levels of blood cholesterol, because blood cholesterol can block the little coronary arteries in the wall of the heart, which we learned about in grade 9, and that can cause heart disease, because if those little blood vessels become blocked, then reduced blood flow to certain parts of the heart could result in a heart attack, all right, where part of the heart muscle dies, or eventually in heart failure. Now, this mutated gene is on chromosome 19, so one of the autosomes, and just like Huntington's chorea, is a dominant mutation. So you only need one copy of the dominant gene to have the disease. All right, so in South Africa, 1 in 72 people of Dutch descent have the disease, but in Holland, the gene frequency of hypercholesterolemia is much lower, okay, because a small group of people came from Holland, settled in South Africa, and that's called the founder effect. So it just happened by chance that more people in that little group had the mutated gene for hypercholesterolemia as well as for Huntington's chorea, which I think is on the next slide. There we go. So that's why there's a higher frequency of this Huntington chorea disease gene in the Afrikaner population. All right. Sorry. So it's all about trying to promote outbreeding. So if there's a bottlenecking event, like with the cheetahs, okay, that's why they're trying to breed in with other cheetahs, trying to introduce other alleles, or to improve heterozygosity. And, with the Afrikaner population, there's more I mean, it's weird to say this about humans, but yes, there's more outbreeding because now there's more marriages between different, groups of people, not just only within the Afrikaner community, or only within, I don't know, the Portuguese community, because I'm not Portuguese, but I am married to a Portuguese person. All right, so it's all about increasing heterozygosity, because then they are stronger, they're more resilient. They might have genes that allow them to be better adapted to the changing environment, or in the case of my little Matski, my little mongrel, my little pavement special, hopefully there is more heterozygosity or hybrid vigor. The chance of having two recessive alleles is lower than, say, with an Alsatian who has been bred, Alsatian breeder that has been bred over many generations, and the higher chance of having homozygous recessive alleles, and therefore resulting in hip dysplasia, etc. All right. Okay, so hybrid vigor is heterosis. Okay, that's not a term that I've actually used. I generally refer to hybrid vigor. It's just more outbreeding, less homozygosity, or less chance of having that Huntington's chorea dominant gene. Okay, or the one that causes hypercholesterolemia. You don't need to know words like this. All right, so outbreeding is using farming as well, crossing different varieties, trying to get a better crop that is more nutritious, grows bigger, grows quicker, more resistant to disease. But I mean, we now know, and you have done a section on genetic engineering where we can genetically alter the genes of crops by introducing vectors with genes, DNA, that hopefully is taken up by the cells of the plant using, I think you did the gene gun, and also using the CRISPR technique. I mean, there's so many articles on that nowadays about how it's a very perfect molecular scissors that cuts DNA in very specific places and then inserts genes that you want inserted into the genome of, say, a crop plant to make them resistant to disease or resistant to drought, or even, with animals. So it's a very new contentious field, and that's where you're going to get asked AIM 3 type questions. Do you think it is ethical that? Okay, it's okay to use a CRISPR technique too, that are genetically engineer, whatever. And then you either say yes or no, and you stick to yes if you said yes, and you stick to no if you said no. And if they give you, say, ask for 2 reasons, then you give a reason and discuss why it is or isn't ethical. If you think it's easier to ask ethical, then go for it, even if you don't believe it's ethical. If you just make sure you give 2 well-explained answers. You're probably looking for 4 marks here, or sometimes they ask for 1 explained answer. Make sure you give enough, because if you just give a little statement, that is definitely not enough for 2 marks. All right. So genetic drift we talked about, which population becomes more, which population becomes more popular or common at the time. Okay, so brown beetles and green beetles. Okay, which one survives and goes on to reproduce more, just like the moths. So there you've got, this is also from my PowerPoint, so green beetles and brown beetles. And the brown ones sort of, is not really here, but they're more camouflaged than the green ones, and the green ones get eaten more. So generations later, or favorite beetles, whatever, generations later, there's only brown beetles, and there's been genetic drift. But that doesn't mean that there's no green beetles left. This is one population. There could be other green beetles that now move. There's still green beetles around, and they can still reproduce because they are still the same species. They are just variants, just like having people with blonde hair and dark hair. They are variants. They're still the one species. All right, then here's another diagram that I have a bit of trouble trying to figure out what's going on. So let's just see here. So here we've got red flowering plants and white flowering plants. Okay, so they're saying only 5 of these 10 plants leave offspring. So it was possibly, the white one, the one that made white flowers that left offspring. So that is by chance increased. The allele frequency has increased. And then for whatever reason, if now only 2 of these plants, oh, I see, sorry, I must look carefully. So here, the ones in white blocks are the ones that produce offspring. Maybe these ones died. Maybe there was a drought, whatever. So now, because these ones bred, you end up with more white ones, but then these 2 are the only ones that produce seeds, so you end up with more red ones. So it just depends on which genes become more common. So genetic drift, pale moths, dark moths. Okay, now I understand it. In class today, I was trying to figure it out, and it just didn't make much sense. All right. So in this example, only some of the generation have surviving offspring. Perhaps the seeds landed in the wrong place, failed to germinate, did not get water. There you go. And then only in the next generation, only 2 of them survived, and so on and so on. Okay, just depends on which ones survive and which not. All right. Okay, so evolution in present times, bacteria which are antibiotic drug resistant, then they can survive and pass on their genes to their offspring. All right, or parasites which are not affected by malaria medication. All right. MDR and XDR, bacterial infections which are multi-drug resistant or extremely drug resistant. Okay, so we know that TB is caused by Mycobacterium, a type of bacterium that you learned about in grade 11. All right. It needs 6 months of treatment, but then sometimes people feel better and then they don't take the medication. They stop the medication because the side effects, and or else they can't get to the clinic. With COVID now, maybe they can't get to the clinic to get medication. Hopefully there are people who are making sure that, and there are often people or trained people or medical whatever that go and check that people are taking their medication to try and prevent the spread of resistant bacteria that are resistant to TB. All right, so now if they do stop taking the medication or they can't get to the clinic to get more medication, then those resistant bacteria are the ones that reproduce, survive, and pass on those that trait. So I said today in the lesson, I think Mrs. Page put this in because now we're talking about using antibacterial soap and alcohol and stuff. So initially, in the original population, none of them were resistant. See there? None resistant. All right? But if we keep on using antibacterial soap, then perhaps over time, some generation 2, some of them become resistant because there's been a mutation. And then over time, that particular trait might be passed on to more individuals when they reproduce because they are not affected by the antibacterial soap, whereas the others are, because it might affect their cell walls or cell membranes, and then they break down. All right, so tuberculosis, malaria, and various types of diarrhea, diseases causing diarrhea, are often the microorganisms that cause them have developed drug resistance, antibiotic resistance, which is a huge problem. All right, so vancomycin was used in, another antibiotic was used in the 1990s in United States hospital intensive care units, and where people actually went into hospital and got so sick that they died from this bug, super bug that they caught, and not what was actually wrong with them in the first place. They might have gone in for an operation and ended up with the super bug and not survived. So yeah, the original population, it was mostly bacteria which are not resistant to the antibiotic. Then one or whatever mutates. And remember, bacteria from grade 11, they are able to join up with a little like tube, and that's called a pilus, and they're able to pass on plasmids with genetic resistance genes. So then that genetic resistant gene becomes more common in the population, and the bacteria which are not resistant to the antibiotic are the ones that die. So eventually end up with a population with more resistant bacteria, and then totally only resistant bacteria survive. And that's why we've got to be very careful about antibiotics. When penicillin first came out, it was regarded as the miracle drug. And now we've actually got to be careful because we are not producing more antibiotics. It's very expensive. It takes very long. And the resources just aren't there to new antibiotics. Remember, they're produced by bacteria naturally, and we are battling to find more. So I think in class today I mentioned that in Russia they've never used antibiotics, that they use something known as bacteriophages. So you might remember it's this little hexagon-shaped viruses with the tails and the spikes that allow them to attach to bacteria. They are natural enemies of bacteria, and they kill the bacteria. So that's what they've used in Russia. And in fact, some people, if they are very ill and are not finding suitable treatments in other countries, then they actually travel to Russia and to get treated by bacteriophages. So that might be a new type of, instead of using antibiotics, using bephages to destroy bacteria and cure us from disease might be something that you guys will end up seeing, becoming more or something that is common in the treatment of disease. All right. And then, yeah, just amazing. All right, so 2013, this is, okay, not a news flash anymore, but the WHO, which we're hearing about a lot lately because of, what's happening with regards to COVID. So it was declared that antibiotic resistance was declared the top health issue worldwide. I think COVID tops the scale at the moment. And we can't use antibiotics against COVID. It's a virus. So 2 million Americans were infected each year with diseases resistant to known antibiotics. If you take antibiotics too often and you don't finish the course, then you are part of the problem because you are allowing bacteria to possibly become resistant because they are able to mutate and produce genes change to prevent them from to protect them from antibiotics that we are using. All right. So insecticides as well, some insects that we have been using certain insecticides on to spray our crops. And, there's that big problem. Which country was it in North Africa recently where they've got those locusts that are really just ravaging the fields, causing a decline in food availability? And now we've got COVID as well. And, people can't work the fields. So it's a huge problem with regards to food security, having enough food for everybody. So now some insects might have a gene, there we go, that makes them resistant to the insecticide. So these guys have died out because they're killed by the crop sprayer, the insecticide from the crop sprayer. And now you've got this bug that is, has, by chance, there's been a mutation of its gene, and now it is resistant to the insecticide. So you end up with a population that is different to the original one. I think I'm going through this more slowly now. You know, at school we were a little bit, I was watching the clock. So hopefully this will help everybody. Okay, and then this is the one that I found, and I stuck into Mam's PowerPoint. So this was really odd that they found vampire moths. They're sometimes called the Halloween moth. They've been found in Siberia. Evidence of evolution at work, because you know these moths don't. And go and have a look at this video. They don't. Moths don't. They're not bloodsuckers. Okay, so these have evolved to become carnivorous and feed on blood. You know, moths normally feed on plant secrete, you know, nectar. Okay, so go and have a look at that if you've got time. It's quite interesting. Gives me the heebie-jeebies. All right, now this one I want to open. Can I open here? Yes. Ooh. Maybe we'll go back to that other one. So I hope it opens. It's taking its time. All right, so animals that are rapidly evolving. And what I said in class today was, when I read, okay, it's from 2015, but when I read this article, the way they talk is very Lamarckian. Remember Jean-Baptiste Lamarck? Acquired characteristics, where they say that the animals change to adapt to a changing environment. No, Darwin says that there's already natural variation, there are already mutated genes that could mean that an organism is better adapted to a changing environment. So please be very careful with that. All right, so this lizard here with more sticky feet, green lizards with sticky feet, because, how did it, I'm just trying to remember here. The smooth branches on trees. So they grew, they didn't grow these toe pads because they were smooth branches. Some of them inherently had a mutated gene that allowed them to be better adapted to this changing environment of having smooth branches, and therefore the ones that have sticky toes by chance are the ones that survive and pass on their genes to future generations. All right. What is the next one? So these shrimps that have lost their eyes. So because shrimps live in caves, it doesn't mean, okay, now the environment causes them to change. If there is a gene, and this is where it kind of gets tricky, or you know, you've got to really think, and is this really possible? But if there were mutations of the genes of the eyes that resulted in the eyes being very small or non-functional, then it doesn't matter, because these are cave dwelling shrimp. All right, and then there was a question in one of the papers, one in the past years. So as a result, they've gone blind, relying on smell and touch to navigate the cavernous depths of these caves. All right. So you either use it or you lose it. Well, that's Lamarckian. Okay, so it's genes that are there based on chance. Okay, although they have found, I know, because I also had a question about these little fish, about how their brains, that they found that their brains are becoming smaller, but it's chance mutations, and that's what we've got to be careful about when we explain. Owls that are changing color, but not being forced to change color, they are changing color because they have genes that are present that could allow them to be better adapted to colder winters. Okay, the gray owls are found, but now because the winters are becoming more mild over the last 50 years, they found that gray owl numbers are declining and brown owl birds are thriving. So this is a brown owl. So that's genetic drift, which one is becoming more common. And the selection pressure is the climate. Climate change, global warming. Fish that migrate earlier, because there are some fish, you know, the water temperatures rise and then they go back to the river to spawn. The female drops her eggs and the male swims over. You might remember from reproductive strategies, external fertilization, and they're finding in the last these 30 years, that the number of salmon migrating later in the season is less, and now these salmon are actually migrating earlier, and it's simply because they are adapting to, excuse me, oh, it's getting late. They are adapting to a changing environment by having random mutations which make them better adapted to this environment, which is being affected by climate change. Okay, bed bugs with super strength. Okay, that's not something I want to know about. But they've got thicker shells, and the chemicals that we use. I've never used bed bug chemicals. Okay, so bed bugs in New York City are now 250 times more resistant to pesticides than the bed bugs in Florida. All right, just because of a random mutation of the ones that are found in New York. All right, and insect resisting is nothing more than sped up evolution. Okay, because if they are naturally resistant to whatever's being used on them, then they pass on those genes to their offspring because they are the ones that survive. A mouse that is immune to poison. So we kill mice with warfarin, Ratix, and so on. But let's just see here now. Super mice were discovered in Germany, where the lowly house mouse bred with its poison-resistant distant cousin, the Algerian mouse. And now you get a hybrid mouse with a mutation that gives them the leg up. They are better adapted than their rodent relatives. But usually hybrids can't reproduce, but sometimes there's an odd hybrid that can reproduce, all right? And that's what they are seeing with regards. Sure, I'm sorry, couldn't even stop that one. All right, so that's evolution in action today. The fact that our jaws are becoming smaller, and maybe some people aren't even born with wisdom teeth anymore, that our appendices may become smaller and totally redundant. Things like that, we're becoming taller, but that's also due to nutrition. That's epigenetics. So, genetically, you might be programmed to be about 1.6 meters tall, but because of good nutrition, they're finding that the shift in the population size, that more people are taller. Even in countries like Japan and China, where generally the population, they on average much shorter. So yeah, so good food supply, less stress, things like that it's epigenetics. It's where the environment influences the genes. All right, so that's something to think about. So that's almost Lamarckian. So Lamarck's ideas are not totally redundant. They are talking about epigenetics, and they are finding examples of how to explain that epigenetics is actually a thing. All right, where the environment can change the person or the organism. So what was the example I was thinking of now? Oh, it's just gone out of my head. Okay. All right, so that's the idea about evolution in recent times. And you generally just look at what they've given to you, and just have, we're obviously going to go over this in winter school, and I mean, I will try and help where I can as well. So please don't just stay at home and not say anything. Please ask questions and ask for an ASP if you need it. All right, so I'm going to stop this now, and this is now video number 4 for Thursday, the 23rd of July. Okay, and good night from me.